Rachel's hands trembled slightly as she pushed open the glass doors of Titan Vale Dojo. The bold gold logo gleamed against the matte black backdrop, and through the entrance she could see the pristine yellow mats edged in jet black trim. A neon sign reading, "No excuses, just tap," glowed menacingly above a small demonstration stage. She'd driven past this place dozens of times over the past 6 months, always slowing down, always finding an excuse not to stop. Today was different. Today marked exactly 2 years since her sister Emma had passed away, and Rachel couldn't spend another anniversary sitting alone in her apartment, drowning in memories. The dojo was everything she'd expected and feared. The air hummed with testosterone and eucalyptus-scented towels. Bass-heavy music pounded from speakers while cameras clicked and laughter echoed off the walls. Men in customized Gs moved across, the mats with visible confidence, their belts decorated with academy badges and sponsorship patches. These weren't just weekend warriors. They were tech founders, fitness influencers, and finance guys who trained between flights to New York. Rachel stood frozen at the entrance, her worn canvas gym bag feeling heavier by the second. Her crisp, white gi was unmarked, fresh from the package. The black belt coiled inside her bag hadn't seen daylight in over 2 years, not since she'd walked away from everything after Emma's diagnosis. "White belts today," someone muttered under his breath as she stepped inside. "Probably someone's girlfriend," another voice replied with a chuckle. "Thinks it's cute." Rachel's chest tightened, but she kept walking. She found a spot at the edge of the mat, removed her sandals, and bowed quietly. The gesture felt foreign after so long away, but muscle memory guided her movements. That's when she caught the attention of Master Derek Cato. Mid-30s, broad-shouldered, and always performing, he ran the dojo like his personal stage. His red-trimmed black GI contrasted sharply with everyone else's gear, marking him as the undisputed king of this domain. "You looking for yoga, sweetheart?" Kaido's voice carried across the entire mat, designed for maximum audience impact. The laughter that followed hit Rachel like a physical blow. Her face burned, but she met his gaze steadily. "Just observing," she said quietly. Kaido strutted over, making a theatrical show of scanning her plain GI. "Black belt, huh? Amazon's getting real bold with their cosplay section." More laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone nearby whispered, "Demo partner," and Rachel felt phones turning in her direction. Her mind flashed to Emma's hospital room, to the promise she'd made to her sister's fading smile. "Don't let them make you small, Rach. You're stronger than you know." "Actually," Kaido snapped his fingers with dramatic flair, "perfect timing. We were just about to demonstrate side control escapes." The room shifted. Laughter became something sharper, hungrier. Phones raised with clearer intent. Rachel felt the familiar weight of being underestimated, the same feeling that had driven her to the mats years ago in Sao Paulo. But this time was different. This time, she had nothing left to lose. Marco Vega, a brown belt known for his TikTok, tutorials and oversized ego, stepped forward with a predatory grin. "Don't worry," he called out to the cameras. "I'll go easy at first." Rachel looked at the borrowed GI Kaido thrust into her hands. Stiff, faded, clearly meant to make her look as out of place as possible. She folded her own pristine white Chi carefully, placing her black belt on top with the same reverence she'd shown it years ago. As she tied the plain white guest belt around her waist, Rachel's fingers found the familiar rhythm of the knot. The borrowed GI hung awkwardly on her frame, but underneath the ill-fitting fabric something ancient and patient was waking up. The yellow mat stretched before her, surrounded by smirking faces and recording phones. Marco cracked his knuckles, playing to his audience. Kaido raised his voice like a ringside announcer. "Let's reset expectations." Rachel bowed to Marco, her movement precise and respectful. As she stepped onto the mat, she felt Emma's presence like a whisper in her ear. "Show them who you really are." The borrowed GI might not fit, and the white belt might be unearned, but the fire burning in Rachel's chest was real. They thought they were getting a victim for their entertainment. They had no idea they'd just invited a ghost back to haunt their perfect little world. Marco didn't waste time establishing dominance. The moment they engaged, he swept Rachel's legs and sent her tumbling to the mat. The impact echoed through the dojo as her back hit with a dull thud. The crowd erupted in cheers and whistles. "Don't blink or you'll miss it!" someone yelled from the sidelines. Rachel absorbed the fall without complaint, rolled to her side, and returned to her knees. Her expression remained unchanged, not defeated, not angry, just quietly observant. Marco stood over her with his hands raised in mock victory before gesturing for her to reset. "Back to square one," Kaido announced theatrically, drawing more laughter from the audience. They reset. This time Marco let her attempt a guard pass, even lifting his leg as if encouraging her movement. The moment she committed, he countered with a violent hip toss that sent her flying across the mat. She hit harder this time, her limbs trailing, awkwardly as phones captured every frame. A student at the edge of the mat mimed her fall, rolling onto his back dramatically. The crowd roared with approval. "She hasn't landed a single thing," someone muttered. "Doesn't even know the basics," another agreed. Rachel stood again, brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and bowed to reset. Her breathing remained, steady, controlled, but something was shifting in her posture. A subtle adjustment in how she distributed her weight, how she tracked Marco's movement. Each time he threw her, she recovered just a little cleaner. Each reset, her stance became slightly more solid. She wasn't fighting back yet, but she was learning, reading, remembering. Marco, drunk on the audience's approval, began adding unnecessary flair to his techniques. He'd sacrifice throw for the cameras, then strut around the mat while Rachel silently returned to position. The borrowed GI pulled awkwardly at her shoulders, the oversized sleeves hampering her movement, but she never complained. "This jujitsu thing isn't for hobbyists," Marco said loud enough for everyone to hear, after pinning her in side control for the third time. Rachel met his eyes and bowed without a word. The gesture was so genuine, so respectful, that it almost seemed to embarrass him. Almost. Kaido kept up his running commentary. "See that patience? That's key. Watch how the brown belt controls distance." But there was something in his voice now, a slight edge of uncertainty, as he watched Rachel absorb punishment that would have sent most beginners running. After her sixth fall, a blue belt near the wall unlocked his phone and started scrolling. His casual browsing turned more focused as he studied something on his screen. He nudged the guy next to him, whispering urgently. The second man's eyes widened as he looked from the phone to Rachel. "That's impossible," he whispered back. Their quiet conversation began to spread like ripples in still water. Phones that had been recording Rachel's failures were now being used for searches. The laughter started to die down as more students pulled out their devices. Rachel didn't notice the shift in attention. She was somewhere else entirely, back in a small gym in São Paulo, absorbing the same kind of punishment from opponents who thought they had her figured out. Her sister Emma had been in the stands that day, cheering every time Rachel got back up. "It's not about winning every exchange," her old coach Mestre Caldas had told her. "It's about surviving until they make a mistake." Marco was getting sloppy. Now, his techniques becoming more about showmanship than control. He'd throw her, pose for the cameras, then reset without maintaining proper pressure. Each time he let her go, Rachel's recovery became smoother, more efficient. "Make it look good for the video!" someone shouted from the back. Marco flashed a thumbs up and launched into another flashy sequence. But this time, when he reached for her collar, Rachel's hip shifted just slightly. The movement was almost invisible, but Marco's base wobbled for just a fraction of a second. Not enough for her to capitalize on, not yet. But it was a crack in his perfect performance. The whispers were getting louder now. "Gracie Cup champion," someone said. "São Paulo division." The words carried weight in this room, even whispered. Kaido heard them too. His theatrical commentary faltered for a moment as he glanced at the students huddled around their phones. When he looked back at the mat, Rachel was getting to her feet again, the same calm expression on her face. But her Eyes were different now, sharper, like she was seeing something that hadn't been there before. The borrowed GI still hung loose on her frame, the white belt still marked her as a beginner, but something fundamental had shifted. The room could feel it, even if they couldn't name it yet. Marco sensed it too. His confident grin flickered, for just a moment as he faced her for another reset. For the first time since the demonstration began, he looked at her not as a prop, but as an opponent. That was his first mistake. The whispers had reached a crescendo. "She trained with Caldas," someone said, no longer bothering to keep their voice down. "That's Rachel Caldas from the 19 Copa Gracie." The name hit the room like a thunderclap. Copa Gracie wasn't some local tournament. It was the most prestigious competition in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, where legends were made and careers were launched. Champions from that tournament didn't show up unannounced in Los Angeles strip mall dojos. Marco's face had gone pale, but he was too deep into his performance to back down now. The cameras were still rolling, the crowd still watching. He'd built his entire reputation on being the gym's golden boy, the brown belt who dominated newcomers with flashy techniques. "Lucky throw," he muttered, loud enough for the microphones to catch. "I was going easy. That's how people slip past you." Kaido tried to regain control of the narrative. "Different schools, different styles," he announced, his voice carrying forced confidence. "Competition techniques aren't always practical for real-world application." But the damage was spreading. Students were showing each other tournament footage on their phones, Rachel in her prime, her movements fluid and precise, accepting gold medals from Coral Belt Masters. The contrast with the struggling woman in the borrowed GI was jarring. That's when Rachel made her decision. She'd spent 2 years in hospitals and funeral homes, 2 years being quiet and small and accommodating. She'd absorbed chemotherapy, schedules and insurance denials and false hope with the same patience she'd just shown on the mat. She'd been the good sister, the supportive caregiver, the one who never complained. But Emma was gone now, and this borrowed GI felt like a costume. For someone she'd never been, Rachel stood at the center of the mat, and for the first time since entering the dojo, spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "One more round." It wasn't a request. Marco glanced at Kaido, looking for an exit. The head instructor's jaw tightened as he calculated his options. The phones were still recording, the students still watching. If he called it off now, it would look like he was protecting Marco from a white belt. "Of course," Kaido said with false magnanimity, "always happy to provide more instruction." The crowd pressed closer, sensing something different in the air. Rachel's posture had changed, not dramatically, but definitively. Her spine was straighter, her feet positioned with mathematical precision. The borrowed GI still hung awkwardly, but now it looked less like a costume and more like camouflage. Marco approached more cautiously this time. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by the careful movement of someone who'd been reminded that reputations could crumble in seconds. He reached for her collar, going for the same grip that had worked 7 times before. But Rachel's hand moved first, not fast, not flashy, just perfectly timed. Her fingers wrapped around his wrist with surgical precision. The grip was different. This time, it wasn't the desperate clutch of a beginner, but the deliberate placement of someone who understood leverage at a molecular level. Marco tried to shake it off and found he couldn't. His eyes widened slightly. The crowd pressed closer. "What's wrong?" Kaido called out, his voice tight with forced cheer. "Just strip the grip and—" Marco tried. He twisted his wrist, pulled. Back, even used his free hand to pry at her fingers. Nothing worked. Rachel's grip wasn't tight in the way that crushes. It was positioned in the way that controls. The room fell silent except for the sound of 2 people breathing and the soft whisper of GI fabric rubbing against itself. No more jokes, no more commentary, just the pure physics of 2 bodies testing each other's limits. That's when Rachel smiled. It wasn't malicious or triumphant. It was the quiet satisfaction of someone remembering exactly who they used to be. Her other hand moved to Marco's collar, and suddenly he was being drawn into a dance he didn't know the steps to. The scissor sweep came without warning. One moment Marco was standing, confident in his base. The next he was flat on his back with Rachel settling into mount position above him. The borrowed GI might not fit properly, but the woman wearing it moved like water, finding its level. Marco bridged violently, trying to buck her off. Rachel flowed with the movement, her weight perfectly. Distributed, never fighting his momentum, but redirecting it. When he tried to turn, she was already there. When he attempted to frame against her hips, she melted around his defenses. The transition to back control was seamless, inevitable. Her hooks slid in like they belonged there, her arm snaking around, his neck with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world. "Turn! Turn!" Kaido screamed from the sidelines. "Strip the hooks!" But Marco couldn't hear him anymore. The world had narrowed to the inexorable pressure around his throat, to the realization that nothing he'd learned in 3 years of training had prepared him for this moment. His hand slapped against Rachel's forearm. Once, twice, 3 times. In rapid succession. The tap was universal, unmistakable, final. Rachel released the choke immediately, sitting back on her heels as Marco collapsed forward, gasping. The borrowed GI was damp with sweat now, her hair had come loose from its braid, but her expression remained unchanged. She bowed to Marco, who was still catching his breath on his hands and knees. Then she stood, walked to her canvas bag, and began changing out of the borrowed G with the same quiet efficiency she'd shown walking in. The room remained frozen, in absolute silence. Her black belt, her real black belt, frayed from years of use, went around her waist with familiar precision. She folded the borrowed gi carefully, set it aside, and shouldered her bag. At the door, she turned back to the room one final time. Her voice carried clearly in the silence. "Thank you for the lesson." Then she was gone, leaving behind a room full of people who suddenly understood they'd witnessed something far more significant than a simple sparring match. Marco was still on his knees, staring at the mat where it had happened. Kaido stood frozen with his mouth half open, his carefully constructed authority crumbling in real time. The borrowed GI lay folded neatly where Rachel had left it, but somehow the dojo felt smaller without her presence filling it. The administrative alert came through at 3:17 a.m. Jennifer Walsh, regional coordinator for the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Federation, was used to late-night notifications, tournament updates, instructor certifications, the occasional disciplinary action. But this one made her sit up in bed and reach for her glasses. Alert, unregistered black belt interaction. Caldas lineage location. Titan Vale Dojo, Los Angeles incident. Type: demonstration, sparring credential conflict. Visitor rank exceeds. Registered head instructor. The attached video file was timestamped from earlier that evening. Jennifer hit play, expecting to see the usual amateur hour footage that occasionally triggered the system's automatic monitoring protocols. Instead, she watched 37 seconds of technical perfection. The woman in the borrowed GI moved, with the kind of precision that took decades to develop. The transition from guard to mount to back control was textbook Caldas methodology. Efficient, inevitable, beautiful. Jennifer had seen that exact sequence demonstrated at seminars by Mestre Caldas himself. She paused the video and ran the facial recognition protocol through the Federation database. The result made her coffee cup freeze halfway to her lips. Match: Rachel Marie Caldas. Rank: 3rd degree black belt lineage, Mestre Eduardo Caldas. Verified. Competition record: Copa Gracie Champion 2019, ADCC Veterans Division Finalist 2018 status, inactive, personal leave 2020 present. Jennifer stared at the screen. Rachel Caldas hadn't competed in over 4 years, hadn't taught at any registered academy, hadn't even renewed her Federation membership. Most people assumed she'd retired permanently after her sister's death, but here she was, in a strip mall dojo in Los Angeles, being treated like some weekend warrior who'd bought her belt online. The system had flagged the incident because Derek, Kaido's credentials were insufficient to host someone of Rachel's rank without proper notification. As head instructor, his 2nd degree black belt meant he could teach beginners and intermediate students, but protocol required special approval for demonstrations involving master-level practitioners. Jennifer pulled up Titan Vale's file. The dojo was registered as a recreational facility, not a competition gym. Their insurance covered basic instruction and light sparring, not the kind of high-level demonstrations that could result in serious injury if mismanaged. More concerning was the pattern of behavior the surveillance footage revealed: the taunting, the deliberate humiliation, the orchestrated setup for social media content. None of it aligned with the respect and professionalism the Federation required from its certified instructors. Jennifer reached for her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. "Mestre Caldas, I'm sorry to wake you. This is Jennifer Walsh from Federation headquarters. We have a situation involving one of your former students." Meanwhile, 3 time zones away in São Paulo, Eduardo Caldas was already awake. At 72, the Choral Beltmaster rarely slept past dawn. He'd been practicing forms in his private training room when his phone buzzed with a video message from a number he didn't recognize. The sender had written simply, "Is this your Rachel?" Caldas watched the footage with growing concern. Not concern for Rachel's safety, he could see immediately that she was in complete control throughout the encounter. His worry was for what had driven her back to the mats after so long away. He remembered the last time he'd spoken to Rachel, at her sister's funeral. She'd been hollow-eyed and distant, moving through the service like a ghost. When he'd offered to help her return to training, she'd simply shaken her head. "I'm not ready, Mestre. I may never be ready." But the woman in the video was ready. More than ready. She was teaching a lesson to people who desperately needed to learn it. Caldas reached for his laptop and began typing an email to the North American Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Federation headquarters. The subject line read, "Regarding my student Rachel Caldas, urgent clarification needed." Back in Los Angeles, Rachel sat in her small apartment, staring at her phone. She hadn't expected the silence to be so loud. For 2 years, she'd lived in a world of medical appointments and insurance forms, where every day was scheduled around someone else's needs. The quiet had been oppressive, yes, but it had also been safe. No expectations, no performance, no chance of letting anyone down. Tonight had shattered that safety. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Saw the video. That was beautiful. Marcus Rivera, Revolution BJJ. Then another. "Welcome back to LA. Heard you've been away. Coffee sometime? Lisa Chen, Apex Academy." And another. "Holy shit, girl. Where have you been hiding? Tony Santos, Gracie Barra, Hollywood." Word was spreading through the tight-knit Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu community with the speed of shared revelation. Rachel Caldas wasn't just back. She'd never really left. The fire that had driven her to championship gold was still burning, waiting for the right moment to emerge. She set the phone aside and walked to her bedroom closet. In the back, behind boxes of Emma's belongings she hadn't been able to donate, hung her competition GIs. Still clean, still pressed, still waiting. Her fingers traced the embroidered patches. From tournaments around the world, each one represented a version of herself she'd thought was gone forever. But tonight had proven that some things don't disappear. They just go underground, waiting for the right moment to resurface. Rachel pulled out her favorite G, the one she'd worn to win Copa Gracie. The fabric was softer than she remembered, worn smooth by years of training and competition. She held it to her face and breathed in the faint scent of old victories. For the first time in 2 years, she began planning her next move. Derek Caido's morning started with an email that made his coffee taste like ash. From Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Federation, North America. Subject: Formal Inquiry, Titan Vale Dojo Incident Report. Priority: Urgent, Mr. Caido. We are writing to inform you of a formal investigation into conduct violations that occurred at your facility on date. Video evidence has been reviewed showing the systematic harassment and humiliation of a visiting black belt practitioner. Additionally, your credentials do not authorize hosting demonstrations with master-level practitioners without federation. Oversight: this represents a serious breach of both safety protocols and professional standards. You have 72 hours to provide a written response explaining your actions. Failure to respond will result in immediate suspension of your teaching, credentials, and revocation of Titan Vale's Federation affiliation. Caido read the email 3 times, his hands shaking slightly. The Federation wasn't some local organization he could charm or intimidate. They controlled access to every major tournament, every legitimate ranking system, every pathway to advanced instruction in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. His phone was already buzzing with notifications. The video had gone viral overnight, not just in BJJ circles but across mainstream social media. Quiet Champion was trending on TikTok. The Instagram post had been shared by major MMA accounts, with millions of followers. But the comments weren't celebrating his dojo's demonstration. They were calling it exactly what it was: a systematic attempt to humiliate someone they'd assumed was defenseless. This is literally the definition of bullying. Imagine being this threatened by a woman existing. She showed more class in 5 minutes than this whole gym has in their entire existence. That instructor should be ashamed of himself. Worse were the comments from people who recognized Rachel's technique. Verified accounts from professional fighters and respected coaches were weighing in, providing context that made Kaido's behavior look even more inexcusable. That's Rachel Caldas, Copa Gracie champion. These clowns had no idea who they were messing with. Mestre Caldas' student. That's real old-school technique. This woman could teach classes on what they're pretending to know. The disrespect shown here is disgusting. She's literally a master-level practitioner being treated like entertainment. Marco found Kaido in the back office, pacing behind his desk like a caged animal. "We need to do damage control," Marco said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. His own social media was being flooded with comments, and not the kind that built followings. "Damage control?" Kaido's laugh was bitter. "The Federation is threatening to shut us down. Our insurance company is asking questions. I've got 3 different news outlets wanting interviews about toxic gym culture." "So what do we do?" Kaido stared at the computer screen, at the endless stream of notifications and angry messages. "We tell our side of the story. She came in here with a fake belt, probably bought it online. We were just trying to maintain standards." But even as he said it, Kaido knew it wouldn't work. The Federation email had included Rachel's competition history, her verified lineage, her legitimate credentials. There was no spinning this as a case of quality control. The next morning, Rachel received a phone call that changed everything. "Ms. Caldas, this is Jennifer Walsh from the BJJ Federation. I'm calling about the incident at Titan Vale Dojo." Rachel had been expecting this. Word traveled fast in the martial arts world, and what had happened couldn't be ignored forever. "I want to apologize," Jennifer continued, "both personally and on behalf of the Federation. The treatment you received was completely unacceptable and violates everything we stand for as an organization." "Thank you," Rachel said quietly, "but I'm not looking for an apology." "I understand, but I hope you'll consider helping us address this properly. What happened to you has highlighted some serious problems with how certain schools are operating. We'd like your input on how to prevent this from happening to other practitioners." Rachel was quiet for a long moment. She thought about Emma, about the promise she'd made to never let anyone make her small. She thought about other women who might walk into gyms like Titan Vale looking for community and finding predators instead. "What did you have in mind?" "We're implementing new protocols for instructor conduct and visitor treatment. We'd like you to help develop the training materials. Your experience, both as a competitor and as someone who was directly affected by these problems, would be invaluable." It wasn't the comeback Rachel had expected. She'd imagined returning to competition, if she returned at all. But this felt more important somehow, more lasting. "I'll think about it," she said. "There's something else," Jennifer added. "Mestre Caldas asked me to give you his regards. He said to tell you that teaching is just another form of competition, and champions find ways to win, even when the game changes." After hanging up, Rachel sat in her apartment's small living room, looking at the framed photo of her and Emma in their hospital scrubs. Her sister had spent her life helping people heal from trauma. Maybe it was time for Rachel to do the same, in her own way. Her phone buzzed with another text from an unknown number. "Saw what happened. You inspired me to go back to training." "Thank you." Then another. "My daughter wants to start BJJ because of your video. Any recommendations for respectful schools?" And another. "I was bullied at my gym too. Seeing you handle it with such class gave me the strength to find a better place to train." Rachel realized that what had started as a personal moment of reclamation had become something much larger. She hadn't just stood up for herself, she'd given others permission to demand better treatment, to expect respect, to believe they deserved dignity even when they were vulnerable. The borrowed GI had been symbolic in ways she hadn't understood at the time. Everyone deserved to step onto the mat as their authentic self, without having to prove their worth to people who'd already decided they didn't belong. It was time to make sure that happened. The formal hearing was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Tuesday in the Federation's downtown Los Angeles office. Rachel arrived 15 minutes early, wearing her competition GI with her original black belt properly tied. No borrowed clothes, no false rankings, no disguises. Derek Cato was already there with his lawyer, a sharp-suited man who looked uncomfortable to be defending what everyone in the room knew was indefensible behavior. Marco sat beside them, his usual swagger replaced by the nervous energy of someone who'd realized his social media fame might cost him everything. Jennifer Walsh presided over the hearing with 2 other Federation officials. The conference room's walls were lined with photos of champions and masters, generations of practitioners who'd built Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu's reputation on principles of respect and discipline. This hearing concerns allegations of conduct violations, harassment and breach of safety protocols, Jennifer began. Mr. Cato, you've reviewed the charges. How do you respond? Caito's lawyer leaned forward. My client maintains that he was conducting a standard demonstration with a visitor whose credentials were unclear. The interaction was consensual and within the bounds of normal academy protocol. Consensual? Rachel spoke for the first time, her voice carrying clearly through the room. I was handed a borrowed G and told I was participating in a demonstration. I was given a white belt despite wearing my own black belt. When I introduced myself politely, I was mocked publicly. At what point was I given a choice? The lawyer shuffled his papers. You could have left at any time. Could I? After being filmed without consent, after being set up as entertainment for your client's social media content? Leaving would have meant confirming every stereotype about women not belonging in combat sports. The real choice was taken away the moment your client decided I was there for his amusement. Jennifer played the video again on the room's large monitor. The footage was even more damning in this formal setting. The orchestrated humiliation, the performed cruelty, the complete absence of anything resembling instruction. Mr. Cato, one of the other officials said, can you explain why you failed to verify Ms. Caldis's credentials before involving her in what you claim was a demonstration? She was wearing a white belt, Cato mumbled, a belt you gave her after she removed her legitimate black belt at your instruction? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Rachel watched Cato's confidence crumble in real time as he realized his lawyer couldn't argument away video evidence and verified credentials. There's something else, Jennifer said, pulling out a thick folder. Since this incident, we've received 17 formal complaints about Titanvale Dojo, women reporting harassment, new students describing systematic humiliation, visitors being treated as entertainment rather than guests. She spread the complaints across the table. This wasn't an isolated incident, Mr. Cato. This was your standard operating procedure. Marco finally spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. We were just having fun. It wasn't meant to be. Serious. Rachel turned to look at him directly. Fun for whom? You humiliated me for content, for clicks, for the entertainment of people who paid to see someone get hurt. That's not martial arts, that's exploitation. You won in the end, Marco protested. You made us look stupid. I didn't make you look like anything, Rachel replied calmly. I simply revealed who you already were. The lawyer tried one final approach. My client's academy has served the community for 5 years. This incident, while regrettable, shouldn't overshadow. 5 years of creating a toxic environment, Jennifer interrupted. 5 years of driving away students who didn't fit your demographic. 5 years of treating martial arts like a social media performance instead of a discipline. She closed the folder and looked directly at Cato. Derek Cato, by the authority of the North American Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Federation, your instructor credentials are hereby revoked. Titan Vale Dojo's Federation affiliation is terminated immediately. You are banned from teaching at any affiliated academy for a period of 2 years, pending completion of sensitivity training and community service. Kaido's face went white. You can't do this. I built that place from nothing. You built it on the wrong foundation, Jennifer replied. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is about respect, discipline, and the development of character. What you created was the opposite of everything our art stands for. She turned to Rachel. Ms. Caldas, on behalf of the Federation, I formally apologize for the treatment you received. We failed in our duty to maintain standards that would have prevented this incident. Rachel nodded gracefully. Apology accepted, but more importantly, what happens next? Next, we implement the new protocols you helped us develop. Mandatory training for all instructors on appropriate treatment of visitors and new students, clear guidelines for demonstrations, and sparring, and a zero-tolerance policy for the kind of behavior that created this situation. As the hearing concluded, Kaido and Marco gathered their things in defeated silence. The lawyer was already calculating his bill and planning his exit from what had become an unwinnable case. Rachel stood to leave, then turned back to the two men who'd tried to make her their victim. I want you to know something, she said quietly. I didn't come back to BJJ to destroy anyone's career or get revenge. I came back because I remembered who I used to be, and I decided I didn't want to be anyone else. She looked at Marco directly. You're young enough to learn from this. Find better teachers, find better examples, become someone worth following instead of someone who needs to tear others down to feel strong. Thus, then she walked out, leaving behind two men who finally understood the difference between being feared and being respected. 3 months after the hearing, Derek Kaido stood in an empty storefront that used to be Titan Vale Dojo. The yellow mats were gone, rolled up and sold to pay creditors. The neon signs had been taken down, leaving pale rectangles on the walls where motivational slogans used to hang. His phone buzzed with another notification, someone else canceling their private training sessions. Word had spread through the martial arts community with devastating efficiency. Students didn't want to be associated with someone who'd been publicly stripped of credentials for harassment and unprofessional conduct. The viral video had been viewed over 2 million times across all platforms. The comment section had become a case study in accountability, with martial arts practitioners around the world discussing how to create more welcoming environments. Marco had fared slightly better after weeks of soul-searching and conversations. With his family, he'd enrolled in a legitimate academy across town, one known for its emphasis on respect and proper instruction. His new coach, a soft-spoken woman with decades of experience, had made it clear that his TikTok reputation meant nothing on her mats. You want to rebuild? She'd told him on his first day. Start by learning how to be a white belt again. Not the belt, the mindset. It was humbling work, training alongside teenagers and accountants who outranked him in character, if not in technique. But slowly, Marco was discovering what Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu felt like when it wasn't performed for cameras or built on the humiliation of others. Meanwhile, Rachel had found her calling in an unexpected place. The Federation's new instructor certification program bore her fingerprints throughout. Every certified teacher now had to complete modules on creating inclusive environments, recognizing and preventing harassment, and understanding the difference between challenging students and degrading them. She'd also started teaching again, but not in the way anyone expected. Her classes met in community centers and youth programs, reaching people who'd never considered martial arts accessible to them. Single mothers learning self-defense, teenagers from underfunded schools discovering discipline and confidence, adults returning to training after traumatic experiences. The mat doesn't care about your background, she'd tell new students. It only cares about who you choose to be when you step onto it. Her reputation had evolved too. The woman who'd been known for her competition victories was now becoming famous for something deeper, her ability to create spaces where people could discover their own strength without fear of judgment or exploitation. The old Rachel might have been satisfied with winning that day at Titan Vale. The new Rachel was building something that would outlast any single victory. One evening, as Rachel was locking up after a women's self-defense class, she found Marco. waiting in the parking lot. He looked different, smaller somehow, less performative. His GI was plain white, unmarked by sponsors or academy patches. "I wanted to apologize," he said without preamble. "Not because my lawyer told me to, not because I got in trouble, because I understand now what I did to you." Rachel studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-serving motivation. She found only genuine regret. "Go on," she said. "I made you into a prop for my ego. I treated you like you weren't even human, just something to showcase my skills against. And when you showed me up, my first instinct was to make excuses instead of taking responsibility." He shifted his weight uncomfortably. "I've been training at Revolution BJJ for 2 months now. Coach Martinez makes us start every class by talking about respect and responsibility. At first I thought it was just politically correct nonsense, but slowly I started to get it." Rachel waited, letting him work through his thoughts. "The strength you showed that day wasn't in beating me," Marco continued. "It was in how you carried yourself through the whole thing. You never lost your dignity, even when we tried to take it from you. That's what a martial artist is supposed to look like." "What do you want from me, Marco?" "Nothing," he said, and seemed surprised by his own answer. "I just wanted you to know that what happened mattered. It changed how I think about training, about respect, about what kind of person I want to be." Rachel nodded slowly. "The apology means something, but what matters more is what you do going forward. I know, I'm trying to be better. It's harder than I thought it would be." "Growth usually is." Marco started to leave, then turned back. "For what it's worth, you're an incredible teacher. The kids at the community center where you teach, they talk about you like you're a superhero." Rachel smiled genuinely for the first time during their conversation. "They are their own superheroes. I just help them remember that." After Marco drove away, Rachel sat in her car for a few minutes, processing the interaction. 2 years ago, she would have been satisfied with his public humiliation, but now she found herself hoping he would succeed in becoming the person he was trying to be. Emma would have liked that growth in her, Rachel thought. Her sister had always believed people could change if they were willing to do the work. 6 months later, Rachel stood at the front of a packed auditorium at the Los Angeles Convention Center. The annual Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Summit had invited her to give the keynote address, and the audience included instructors, competitors, and federation officials from across North America. "When I walked into that dojo last year," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system, "I wasn't trying to make a statement. I was just trying to remember who I used to be." The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. But what I learned that day was that who I used to be wasn't enough anymore. The woman who won tournaments was strong, yes, but she was also isolated, focused only on her own success, disconnected from the larger community she was part of. Rachel paused, looking out at the faces in the crowd, young and old, men and women representing dozens of different academies and approaches to the art. The woman who walked out of that dojo had to become something more. She had to become someone who understood that strength without compassion is just brutality, that skill without respect is just performance, that victory without dignity is just emptiness. She clicked to the next slide, showing photos from her community classes. Kids learning to defend themselves, women building confidence, adults discovering that it was never too late to start something new. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gave me everything when I was young and hungry and desperate to prove myself. But it gave me even more when I learned to share it properly, with patience, with respect, with the understanding that every person who steps onto the mat deserves to be treated with dignity. The applause started slowly but built into something thunderous. Rachel waited for it to subside before delivering her final point. "We are the guardians of this art. Every interaction we have, every class we teach, every way we treat visitors and new students, it all shapes what Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu becomes for the next generation. We can choose to build it on ego and exclusion, or we can build it on respect and inclusion." She looked directly at a section where she knew several academy owners were sitting. "The choice is ours. The responsibility is ours. The future is ours to create. As she left the stage to sustained applause, Rachel felt a sense of completion she hadn't experienced since Emma's death. This wasn't the ending she'd expected when she first tied on that borrowed GI, but it was the ending that mattered. In the audience, Jennifer Walsh made notes for the Federation's quarterly newsletter. The new instructor protocols had reduced harassment complaints by 73% in their first 6 months. Academies were reporting increased retention among women and older students. The culture was shifting, slowly but measurably. Marco sat in the back row, taking notes in a small notebook. He'd been promoted to blue belt the week before, not for his technique, which was still being rebuilt from the ground up, but for his attitude and his willingness to help newer students feel welcome. His Instagram account now featured study techniques and motivational posts about personal growth rather than highlight reels of him dominating sparring partners. Even Derek Cato was there, though he sat alone and left before the networking reception. He was halfway through his required community service, teaching self-defense to seniors at a community center. The work was humbling and unpaid, but it was slowly teaching him what martial arts instruction was supposed to feel like when it wasn't about his ego. After the event, Rachel drove to Forest Lawn Cemetery and sat beside Emma's grave as the sun set over Los Angeles. She'd brought her medal from Copa Gracie, the one that had launched her competitive career and defined her identity for so many years. "I thought this was the most important thing I'd ever accomplish," she said, holding the gold medal up to catch the last rays of sunlight. "But I was wrong. The most important thing was what came after." She placed the medal gently against the headstone and pulled out her phone. Her contact list now included dozens of students, fellow instructors, and people whose lives had been touched by the community she was building. A text was waiting from one of her youngest students. "Miss Rachel, I used the breathing techniques you taught us during my math test today. I got a B+. Thank you for teaching me to be strong inside and outside." Rachel smiled, reading the message twice. This was what victory looked like now. Not a moment of personal triumph, but a lifetime of small, meaningful impacts on other people's journeys. She stood, brushed the grass from her jeans, and looked one last time at Emma's name carved in granite. "I kept my promise," she whispered. "I didn't let them make me small. And now I'm helping others remember how big they really are." As she walked back to her car, Rachel's phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. Community class tomorrow, 6 p.m. She had 32 students signed up, ranging in age from 14 to 67. Half of them had never done martial arts before. Rachel's program gave them a safe place to start. The borrowed GI was long forgotten, but the lesson it had taught her would last forever. Sometimes you have to lose yourself completely before you can discover who you're truly meant to become. The mat was waiting. It always was. And tomorrow, she would step onto it not as a former champion trying to reclaim past glory, but as a teacher, a mentor, and a guardian of something much more valuable than any tournament victory could ever be. The quiet strength that had carried her through her sister's illness, through her own grief, and through that humiliating day at Titan Vale had become something bigger, a foundation for building the kind of community where everyone could discover their own quiet strength. That was a victory worth more than all the gold medals in the world. Author's note: this story is inspired by the countless martial artists who choose respect over ego, inclusion over exclusion, and character over competition. In gyms around the world, quiet champions are building communities where strength is measured not by who you can defeat, but by who you can lift up. If you enjoyed this story of quiet strength and powerful transformation, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. We share real-life tales of courage, justice, and people who refuse to be underestimated. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world. Have you ever experienced a moment where you had to stand up for yourself when no one expected you to? Share your story with us. Coming up next, the substitute teacher who exposed the principal's secret, a story about corruption, courage, and one woman's determination to protect her students. You won't want to miss it. Remember to ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest stories of everyday heroes making extraordinary impacts. Until next time, Keep fighting the good fight